I drove 600 miles to surprise my wife at our daughter's luxury estate, only to end up in handcuffs in the back of a squad car while my son-in-law smirked at me from his porch. But what destroyed me was not the cold steel biting into my wrists or the humiliating stares of the wealthy neighbors peeking through their curtains. It was the video a stranger showed me 5 minutes before the police arrived. A video of my wife, the woman I have loved for 40 years and treated like a queen, on her knees in a maid's uniform scrubbing a floor while my own daughter's family laughed at her. They thought I was just a senile old man they could silence with a restraining order. They thought they could erase me. They were about to find out that Franklin Moore does not break. Before I tell you how I tore their perfect world apart, let me know in the comments if you would break the law to save the person you love. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe justice always finds a way. My 2015 Ford F-150 looked like a bruised fighter among the pristine landscaping of Emerald Hills. This was a gated community in Connecticut where the grass was cut with manicure scissors and the silence cost $1 million a year. I adjusted my rearview mirror, checking my tie. I had put on my Sunday best, a charcoal suit that was a little tight around the shoulders because my wife Esther always liked me in a suit. On the passenger seat sat a bouquet of purple hydrangeas, her absolute favorite, wilting slightly in the summer heat. I should have been happy. I was a retired civil engineer, 70 years old, healthy enough to still frame a deck, and I was about to surprise my wife. But a knot of unease had been tightening in my stomach for the last 300 miles. Esther had gone to visit our daughter Gabrielle and her husband Lachlan 2 weeks ago. For the first 3 days we spoke every night. Esther sounded tired but happy to be helping with the house. Then the calls stopped. When I called her cell, it went straight to voicemail. When I called the house line, Lachlan would pick up. His voice was always smooth, too smooth, like polished marble. Esther is sleeping, Franklin. Esther is in the shower. Esther went for a walk and forgot her phone. The excuses were reasonable, but the frequency was not. My wife and I had never gone a day without speaking in 4 decades. Not once. Yesterday when I called and Lachlan told me she had accidentally dropped her phone in the pool, I did not argue. I did not ask to speak to Gabrielle. I simply hung up, packed a bag, and started driving. I pulled up to the security gate. I expected a hassle, but when I punched in the code Gabrielle had given me a year ago, the iron gates swung open. That small victory made me relax a fraction. Maybe I was just being a paranoid old man. Maybe she really did drop her phone. I navigated the winding streets, passing mansions that looked more like museums than homes. I had paid for Gabrielle's college tuition with sweat and overtime, working on bridge projects in the Georgia heat so she could sit in air-conditioned classrooms. I was proud of her success, but I never warmed up to Lachlan Vance. He was 38, a real estate broker with a smile that never reached his eyes and a handshake that felt like a wet fish. I parked my truck on the street, not wanting to stain their decorative driveway with oil. The house was enormous, a white colonial beast with pillars that looked like they belonged in Rome. I grabbed the flowers and walked up the path. My heart was pounding, not from exertion, but from a strange sense of dread that I could not shake. I was 10 feet from the front door when the bushes to my left exploded with motion. A man lunged at me. Instincts from my youth kicked in, and I dropped the flowers, raising my fists, ready to defend myself. But the man did not attack. He grabbed my arm with a desperate grip. He was white, about my age, wearing expensive gardening clothes that were stained with real dirt. He looked terrified. "Stop!" he hissed, his voice a frantic whisper. "Do not ring that doorbell." I pulled my arm back, frowning at him. "Who are you?" "Get out of my way. I am Russo," he said, glancing nervously at the second-floor windows of my daughter's house. "I live next door. I saw you pull up. You are the father, right? The one from Atlanta." "I am," I said, straightening my jacket. "And I am going to see my wife." "No, you are not," Russo said, stepping between me and the door. "If you ring that bell, you will lose her. They are waiting for you." I looked at him like he was insane. "What are you talking about?" "My wife is a guest in that house." Russo pulled a smartphone from his pocket. His hands were shaking. "You need to see this. I recorded it this morning through the kitchen window. I have been watching them. Something is wrong over there." I took the phone. The screen was bright in the sunlight, so I had to cup my hand around it to see. The video was shaky at first, zoomed in through the glass of the kitchen window. Then it focused. My breath caught in my throat. I felt like I had been punched in the gut by a sledgehammer. There was Esther. But it was not the Esther I knew. She was wearing a gray uniform that looked 3 sizes too big, tattered at the hem. She was on her hands and knees on the marble floor. She was scrubbing. Not just wiping, but scrubbing with a frantic, terrified intensity. Her beautiful silver hair, which she always kept in a neat bun, was hanging in stringy, unwashed clumps around her face. The camera panned slightly to the right. Sitting at the kitchen island drinking red wine was Lachlan, and an older woman I recognized as his mother, Patricia. They were laughing. Patricia said something and pointed at the floor. In the video, I saw my wife flinch. Esther, the woman who had taught history for 30 years, the woman who commanded respect in any room she entered, flinched like a beaten dog. She crawled forward and started scrubbing the spot Patricia had pointed to. My vision blurred. A roar filled my ears, drowning out the birds singing in the trees. This was not a visit. This was slavery. When was this? I asked, my voice sounding like gravel grinding together. 2 hours ago, Russo whispered. I have seen her sleeping in the laundry room. On a cot. They yell at her. I tried to wave at her once when she was taking out the trash, but she looked right through me. Her eyes... She looked drugged, my friend. I shoved the phone back into his chest. I did not feel fear anymore. I felt a cold, calculated rage. I am going to kill him. No, Russo grabbed my shoulder again. That is what he wants. Listen to me. The police are already on their way. What? I have a police scanner, Russo said quickly. Lachlan called 911 10 minutes ago. He reported a suspicious vehicle. A black male, elderly, potentially armed and confused. He gave them your license plate number. He knew you were coming. I froze. He knew how the gate code, I realized. The system probably sent a notification to his phone the moment I entered the community. It was a trap. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder by the second. I looked at the heavy oak door. My wife was in there, suffering. I could kick that door down. I could get to her before the cops arrived. I took a step toward the porch. Do not do it, Russo pleaded. If you break in, he shoots you. He has a gun permit. He has been bragging about it at the HOA meetings. He wants you to give him a reason. The first cruiser screeched around the corner, followed closely by a second one. Blue and red lights bounced off the white pillars of the mansion. I stood my ground. I was not a criminal. I was a husband. I smoothed my jacket again. I would explain. I would show them the video. Officers poured out of the cars, guns drawn. Get on the ground. Now I raised my hands slowly, palms open. I am unarmed. My name is Franklin Moore. My wife is in that house, and she is being held against her will. On the ground, the young officer screamed, his finger twitching on the trigger. I slowly lowered myself to one knee, keeping my movements deliberate. I was an engineer. I knew about stress points and breaking points. Right now, the situation was at a breaking point. Then the front door opened. Lachlan Vance stepped out. He was wearing a cashmere sweater draped over his shoulders and holding a glass of iced tea. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear that was so perfectly acted it made me sick. "Oh, thank God you are here, officers," Lachlan said, his voice trembling just enough. "That is him. That is my father-in-law. We have been so worried." He walked down the steps, staying behind the wall of police officers. "Lachlan," I said, my voice steady. "Where is Esther?" Lachlan looked at the police sergeant. "I am so sorry about this. He has dementia. It has gotten violent lately. He thinks we are kidnapping his wife. We tried to get him help in Atlanta, but he escaped." "Liar," I roared, standing up. The officers tackled me. My face was pressed into the hot asphalt. Pain shot through my shoulder, the same shoulder I had injured building the overpass on I-85. I felt the cold metal of handcuffs snap around my wrists. "Check his pockets," Lachlan shouted. "He usually carries a knife. He threatened to gut me last time he had an episode. I have never carried a knife in my life." I spat out gravel, cutting into my lip. "Show them the video," I yelled to Russo. "Show them." I twisted my head to look for Russo. He was gone. He had retreated back into the bushes or into his own house. I was alone. Lachlan walked closer, looking down at me. He shook his head sadly. "Gabrielle is heartbroken, Franklin. We just want Mom to be safe." "We cannot let you hurt her anymore." "Gabrielle," I shouted. "Gabrielle, get out here." My daughter stepped out of the house. She was wearing a silk blouse and holding a handkerchief. She looked at me, pinned to the ground, bleeding and humiliated. For a second, I saw a flicker of shame in her eyes. Just a flicker. Then she looked at Lachlan, and the fear took over. "I am sorry, Daddy," she said, her voice barely a whisper. But Lachlan is right. You are not well. You need to go. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. My own daughter. The girl I had taught to ride a bike. The girl I had walked down the aisle. She was part of this. Get him out of here, the sergeant said, hauling me up by my bad arm. As they shoved me into the back of the cruiser, I locked eyes with Lachlan one last time. He stopped acting. The concern vanished from his face. He took a sip of his tea and winked at me, a slow, deliberate wink. You have no idea who you just declared war on, son, I thought. The car door slammed shut, sealing me in. I did not thrash, I did not scream. I sat very still. I closed my eyes and pictured the structural blueprints of a suspension bridge. Every structure has a weakness. Every load-bearing wall can be compromised if you apply pressure at the right angle. Lachlan Vance had money. He had the police. He had my daughter. But he had made a fatal calculation error. He assumed I was just a helpless old man. He forgot that before I was a retiree, I was the man who built the roads he drove his fancy cars on. I knew how to build things, but I also knew exactly how to take them apart. As the police car drove me away from my wife, I stopped being a husband. I became an architect of ruin, and I was going to bring his entire house down, brick by brick. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and intimidation. My wrists were raw from the handcuffs, but I sat with my back straight. I was not a criminal. I was a man who had built bridges that withstood hurricanes, and I would not crumble before a local police sergeant who looked like he was barely out of high school. Across the metal table sat Lachlan. He was not wearing handcuffs. He was sitting comfortably holding a thick file folder, looking at the officers with a practiced expression of exhausted concern. Sergeant Miller slid a piece of paper toward me. It was a medical evaluation. I looked at the header. It was from a private clinic in Atlanta I had never visited. The diagnosis was typed in bold letters. Advanced dementia with paranoid delusions and aggressive tendencies. The date on the signature was 3 months ago. This is a forgery, I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. It was the voice I used when I told a contractor his concrete mix was substandard. I have never met this Dr. Albright. My primary care physician is Dr. Henderson at Grady Memorial. You can call him right now. Lachlan sighed. A long, heavy sigh that made the officers look at him with sympathy. See, this is what I was talking about. He forgets. Dad, we took you to Dr. Albright when you visited us for Christmas. You do not remember because of the condition. That is why we need to keep Mom safe. You hurt her last time, remember? I stared at him. I had not visited them for Christmas. They had come to us, and I had certainly never hurt Esther. The lie was so bold, so absolute, that it took my breath away. Lachlan was not just lying, he was rewriting reality. I am not signing anything, I said, pushing the paper back, and I am not leaving until I see my wife. Lachlan leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper intended only for me and the sergeant. Franklin, if you do not agree to the restraining order and leave town tonight, I will press charges for assault. I have 3 neighbors who saw you threaten me. With your record, you will die in prison. Or you can walk away, go back to Atlanta, and we will take excellent care of Esther. My record. He was talking about a protest arrest from 1978. A civil rights march where I stood my ground. He was weaponizing my history of fighting for justice against me. I looked at the sergeant. He was not looking at the facts. He was looking at a well-dressed white man protecting his home from an angry black man. I knew that look. I had seen it my whole life. Arguing would get me locked up. And if I was locked up, Esther was defenseless. I need my lawyer, I said. Not a public defender. I want to call Marcus Vance. Lachlan flinched. Just a fraction of an inch. He knew Marcus. Marcus Vance was no relation to Lachlan Vance. Marcus was an old fraternity brother of mine from Howard University. He was the shark you called when the water was full of blood. You have one call, the sergeant grunted. I made the call, Marcus answered on the second ring. I gave him the situation in 30 seconds. No emotion, just facts. False imprisonment, forged medical documents, hostile police environment. Marcus told me to say nothing, sign nothing, and wait. 2 hours later, I was released. Marcus had faxed a threat of a federal lawsuit so potent that the station commander personally uncuffed me. But the victory was hollow. The restraining order was temporary but valid for 72 hours. I could not go within 500 yards of Lachlan's house or have any contact with Esther. I walked out of the station into the humid Connecticut night. Lachlan was gone. My truck was impounded. I hailed a cab and told the driver to take me to the cheapest motel he knew that was not on the police radar. As I watched the city lights blur past the window, I did not feel relief. I felt a cold realization settling in my bones. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision by Lachlan. The medical report was dated 3 months ago. This was a premeditated extraction. The Motel 6 room was small and smelled of lemon cleaner and cigarettes. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress and stared at the blank television screen. I needed to think. I needed to deconstruct this trap before it snapped my neck. How did they get the power to do this? How did they get control over Esther? Then it hit me. The memory surfaced like a corpse in a river. 6 months ago. Gabrielle had come to Atlanta alone. It was a rare visit. She was sweet, attentive. She cooked dinner for us. She talked about how worried she was about our future. "Daddy, what if something happens to you?" she had asked, pouring me a glass of iced tea. "The courts can freeze your assets for months." Mom would be helpless. She had placed a stack of documents on the dining room table. "It was just insurance," she said. "Standard forms to ensure she could help us manage our accounts if we ever got sick." She called it a family asset protection plan. I read the first few pages. It looked legitimate. It talked about protecting our retirement fund. I trusted her. She was my little girl, the girl I had carried on my shoulders at the zoo, the girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged. I looked at Esther. Esther smiled and said, "Sign it, Franklin. She is just trying to look out for us." So I signed. I signed my life away. I realized now, sitting in that dim motel room, that those were not insurance papers. It was a durable power of attorney, a sweeping mandate that gave Gabrielle full control over our finances, our medical decisions, and our property the moment a doctor declared us incapacitated. And with a forged letter from a corrupt doctor like Albright, she had triggered the clause. I put my head in my hands. I had built the cage myself. I had handed them the key. I let out a groan that sounded like a wounded animal. My wife was a prisoner because I was too proud to believe my own daughter could be a monster. But grief is a luxury I could not afford. I checked my watch. It was 2 a.m. The restraining order said 500 yards, but the law did not account for the geography of the land. I knew maps, I knew terrain. I pulled up the satellite view of Emerald Hills on my phone. Lachlan's house backed up to a dense wooded preserve, a public land. I washed my face with cold water. I tied my shoes tight. I was 70 years old, but I was not dead. I left the motel room. I did not take a taxi. I walked 3 miles to the edge of the preserve. The woods were pitch black. Brambles tore at my suit trousers. Mud sucked at my dress shoes. I did not care. I moved with the silent determination of a soldier behind enemy lines. I navigated by the moonlight filtering through the canopy. After an hour of hiking, I saw it, the glow of the mansion through the trees. I crept closer, staying low in the brush. I was technically on public land, but I was close enough to see into the backyard. The house was dark except for the kitchen and a room on the ground floor, the laundry room. I raised the binoculars I had bought at a 24-hour gas station on the walk over. The lens focused. The image I saw froze the blood in my veins. Esther was sitting on a folding cot in the laundry room. She was rocking back and forth. She looked terrified. Her lips were moving, but I could not hear her. Then the door opened. Gabrielle walked in. My daughter. She was wearing a silk robe. She looked annoyed. She said something sharp to her mother. Esther flinched and tried to stand up. She reached out a hand toward Gabrielle, perhaps pleading, perhaps just wanting to touch her child. Gabrielle slapped her hand away. I bit my knuckle to stop myself from screaming. Then Lachlan entered. He was holding a medical kit. He pulled out a syringe and a small vial. He filled the syringe with a clear liquid. Esther shook her head frantically. She backed into the corner of the small room, cowering behind an ironing board. Gabrielle grabbed her mother's shoulders and pinned her against the wall. My wife, the woman who had paid for Gabrielle's ballet lessons, the woman who had nursed Gabrielle through chickenpox, was struggling against her own child. Lachlan stepped forward and jammed the needle into Esther's arm. Esther's body went rigid, then slumped. Gabrielle let her go, and my wife slid down the wall to the floor, her eyes rolling back in her head. They did not lift her onto the cot. They did not cover her with a blanket. They stood over her talking. Lachlan laughed and kissed Gabrielle on the forehead. Then he turned off the light, leaving my wife unconscious on the cold tile floor in the dark. I lowered the binoculars. Tears were streaming down my face, hot and angry. This was not a family dispute. This was torture. They were sedating her to keep her compliant. They were erasing her mind so they could drain our accounts. I looked at the dark house. I wanted to run down there and burn it to the ground. I wanted to tear them apart with my bare hands, but I stopped myself. I took a deep breath. The engineer in me took over. If I attacked now, I would be the crazy black man the police expected. I would be shot or imprisoned, and Esther would die in that laundry room. I needed proof. Irrefutable, undeniable proof. I needed to get inside. I needed to get that syringe. I needed to get Esther out. I turned around and faded back into the darkness of the forest. I had seen enough. The Franklin Moore who signed those papers 6 months ago was gone. The father who loved his daughter was gone. The only thing left was a man with a mission. They had started a war with the wrong man. I was going to bring their house of cards down, and I would make sure they felt every single collapse. The woods behind Russo's house offered the only cover from the floodlights scanning the perimeter of my daughter's estate. Russo handed me a pair of grease-stained coveralls and a heavy tool belt. He was shaking, his face pale in the moonlight, but his hands were steady as he gripped a large pipe wrench. We had a plan, and it was a plan born of desperation. Russo had deliberately sabotaged the main sewage line connecting his property to the junction box that sat right on the edge of Lachlan's manicured lawn. It was dirty work, literally, but it was the only way to get the service gate open without triggering the silent alarm. I pulled the coveralls over my suit. The smell of oil and old sweat filled my nose, masking the scent of the expensive cologne I had worn for the reunion that never happened. Russo looked at me. He did not ask if I was ready. He knew I had no choice. He pointed toward the service entrance where a delivery truck was idling. I walked with my head down, matching Russo's limp, carrying a heavy toolbox that rattled with every step. The security guard at the service gate barely looked up from his phone. He saw 2 men in work clothes smelling of sewage and waved us through with a wrinkled nose. We were invisible. To men like him and to men like Lachlan, people who worked with their hands were not human beings. We were just background noise. We made our way to the back of the house. The sound of jazz music drifted from the open patio doors. It was a smooth, expensive sound that clashed with the thumping of my heart. Through the French windows I could see the silhouette of the party. It was a fundraiser for some local politician Lachlan was trying to buy favor with. I saw women in sequined gowns holding flutes of champagne and men in tuxedos laughing with their heads thrown back. Russo pointed to a side door that led directly into the kitchen. He whispered that he would create a distraction with the external water valve to draw the catering staff out. I nodded. As soon as the staff ran out complaining about the water pressure, I slipped inside. The kitchen was an industrial cavern of stainless steel and white marble. It smelled of roasted duck truffle oil and money. But underneath those rich scents was the smell of fear. I hid behind a stack of crates filled with wine bottles peering through the gap. The room was buzzing with hired waiters rushing back and forth with silver platters, and there in the corner near the garbage disposal was my wife. Esther was not wearing a gown. She was wearing a gray uniform that hung loosely on her frame. It was stained with wine and sauce. She was not standing with the guests. She was standing next to a large plastic bin filled with dirty plates. I watched my hands gripping the cold steel of the wine rack until my knuckles turned white. A waiter came in carrying a tray of half-eaten filet mignon. He scraped the leftovers into the bin. A piece of steak fell onto the counter instead of into the trash. Esther reached out. Her hand was trembling. She looked around quickly, her eyes wide with a primal hunger I had never seen in her before. She picked up the piece of cold, chewed meat and put it in her mouth. She chewed quickly, desperate to swallow it before anyone saw. My stomach turned. Tears burned my eyes hot and acidic. This was the woman who had taught me table manners. This was the woman who hosted Sunday dinners for the entire neighborhood. Now she was stealing scraps from the garbage like a starving stray dog in her own daughter's house. Before she could finish swallowing, the swinging door burst open. Patricia Lachlan's mother strode in. She was wearing a red dress that looked like it cost more than my truck. She held an empty wine glass. She saw Esther chewing. Patricia did not scream. She did not scold. She walked over to Esther with a smile that was colder than the grave. She reached out and pinched Esther's cheek, digging her manicured nails into my wife's soft skin. "Spit it out," Patricia whispered. Her voice carried across the room to where I was hiding. "We do not feed the help until the guests are gone. You know the rules, Esther." Esther's eyes filled with tears. She opened her mouth and let the piece of meat fall into her hand. Patricia slapped Esther's hand, knocking the food onto the floor. "Clean it up," Patricia ordered. "And then refill my glass. The 82 Bordeaux. And try not to spill it this time, you clumsy old mule." Esther dropped to her knees. She did not argue. She did not look defiant. She looked broken. She began to wipe the floor with the hem of her uniform. Patricia stepped over her laughing as she walked back out to the party, her red heels clicking inches from my wife's fingers. I bit down on my lips so hard I tasted blood. The rage inside me was no longer a fire. It was a nuclear reactor melting down. I wanted to storm out there and snap Patricia's neck. I wanted to overturn the tables and smash every bottle of wine in that house. But I froze. I saw Lachlan walk into the kitchen. He was laughing with a man I recognized as a local judge. Lachlan leaned against the counter right next to where Esther was still scrubbing the floor. He rested his polished shoe on the rung of a stool just inches from Esther's face. He did not even acknowledge her presence. To him, she was less than the furniture. She was just an appliance that cleaned up messes. "This party is a triumph," Lachlan said, swirling his wine. "The donations alone will cover the new wing of the house. We are thinking of putting in a wine cellar downstairs." A wine cellar, in the basement where I knew he had assaulted me, in the basement where he was keeping my wife prisoner. The judge laughed and patted Lachlan on the back. "You are a good man, Vance, taking care of your in-laws like this. Most people would have put them in a home." Lachlan looked down at Esther, who was now struggling to stand up with a heavy tray of dirty glasses. He smiled a benevolent, saintly smile. "Family is everything, Judge. We do what we must." Esther stumbled. The tray tipped. A single crystal glass slid off and shattered on the floor. The sound was like a gunshot. The kitchen went silent. The waiters froze. Lachlan's smile vanished instantly. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. "Get out!" he hissed at the judge, his voice low. "Give me a moment with my mother-in-law. She is having an episode." The judge nodded sympathetically and left. The moment the door swung shut, Lachlan kicked the broken glass toward Esther. A shard sliced across her ankle. She yelped a small, pathetic sound. "Clean it up," Lachlan said, his voice devoid of humanity. "And if you break one more glass, you spend the night in the box. Do you hear me?" "The box." Esther began to sob. "Please, no. Not the box. I will be good. I promise I will be good. Sir." She called him sir. Lachlan turned and walked out, adjusting his cufflinks. The waiters scurried away terrified, leaving Esther alone in the center of the kitchen, weeping over broken glass and her own blood. This was my moment. The kitchen was empty. I stepped out from behind the crates. I moved quickly, ignoring the pain in my bad knee. I crossed the marble floor in 3 strides and knelt beside her. "Esther," I whispered. My voice broke. "Esther, honey, look at me." I reached out and took her hands. They were cold and rough, the skin dry and cracked. She flinched violently, pulling away and curling into a ball. "No, no, I am cleaning it," she cried out. Her eyes squeezed shut. "Do not put me in the box. I am sorry. It is me, Esther," I said, grabbing her shoulders firmly. "It is Franklin. It is your husband. Look at me." She opened her eyes. They were hazy, the pupils dilated. She looked at my face. For a second, I saw a flicker of recognition, a spark of the woman who had been my partner for 40 years. My heart soared. "Franklin," she whispered. "Yes, baby. It is me. I am here to take you home." I started to pull her up, but then the spark died. Her eyes clouded over again. The terror returned stronger than before. She looked at my grease-stained coveralls. She looked at the door where Lachlan had exited. "You are a trick," she screamed. "You are one of his tricks. He said he would send a demon to test me." She pushed me away with a strength I did not know she had. She scrambled backward across the floor, knocking over the trash bin. Garbage spilled everywhere. "Go away," she shrieked. "Master, master, help! The demon is here." Her screams echoed off the tile walls. My heart shattered into a million pieces. She did not know me. They had broken her mind so thoroughly that she saw her savior as a monster and her tormentor as her master. I heard heavy footsteps running toward the kitchen, voices shouting, "There is someone in there." Lachlan's voice. I looked at Esther one last time. She was cowering in the corner, pointing at me and screaming for help. I wanted to stay. I wanted to hold her until she remembered me, but if I stayed, I would be arrested again, and this time I would never get out. I would never be able to save her. Russo grabbed the back of my coveralls. We have to go now. I stood up. I had to leave my wife on the floor, surrounded by garbage, screaming for the man who was killing her to come and save her from me. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. It felt like tearing my own soul out of my chest. I turned and ran. We slipped out the side door just as the main doors burst open. I heard Lachlan shouting orders to the security team. We sprinted into the darkness of the woods, the sound of my wife's screams fading behind me but burning itself into my memory forever. I did not look back. I could not, because if I looked back, I would have turned around and killed them all, and then I would have lost everything. I kept running the image of Esther eating scraps from the garbage, fueling a cold, dark resolve in my gut. They had taken her mind. They had taken her dignity. But they had made one mistake. They had let me see it. And now I was not just going to rescue her. I was going to destroy them. I was going to make them eat garbage. I was going to make them beg. The time for mercy was over. The time for the architect to bring down the house had begun. The morning sun did not bring warmth. It only brought clarity. After fleeing the woods, I did not sleep. I sat in my rental car watching the road that led out of the Emerald Hills community. I was a hunter now. I knew Gabrielle's routine. I knew that every Tuesday at 10 o'clock she went to an upscale organic market to buy overpriced kale and artisanal cheese. It was a habit she had bragged about on social media, curating a perfect life while her mother was treated like a stray dog. At 10:15, a silver Mercedes SUV glided out of the gates. I recognized the personalized license plate. Gabby V. I followed her. My hands were steady on the wheel of my battered sedan. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching a movie of my own life. The father who had once driven this girl to ballet practice was gone. In his place sat a man who was about to conduct an interrogation. She pulled into the parking lot of the market. It was crowded with luxury cars and women in yoga pants who looked like they had never worked a day in their lives. Gabrielle parked in a spot reserved for expectant mothers, even though she was not pregnant. That small act of entitlement made my jaw tighten. She stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying a designer bag that probably cost more than my first year of college tuition. I waited until she was locking her car. I pulled up directly behind her, blocking her exit. I stepped out. Gabrielle turned annoyed by the car blocking her. When she saw me, she did not scream. She did not run. She simply rolled her eyes and sighed a sound of pure exasperation. "Daddy, really," she said, adjusting her sunglasses. "I thought the police told you to leave the state. Do you want to go to jail?" I looked at her. I searched her face for any sign of the little girl who used to cry when she scraped her knee. I looked for the daughter who had written me poems for Father's Day. She was not there. This woman was a stranger, wearing my daughter's skin. "We need to talk, Gabrielle," I said. My voice was low and rough. "I do not have time for your drama," she snapped. "I have a brunch at noon. Move your car." I took a step closer. She smelled of expensive perfume and decay. "You are going to listen to me. I saw Esther last night. I saw what you and your husband are doing to her." Gabrielle froze. For a split second I saw fear, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, hard sneer. She looked around the parking lot to make sure no one was listening. Then she stepped closer to me, lowering her voice. "You were trespassing," she hissed. "Lachlan should have shot you." "Why, Gabrielle?" I asked, the pain cracking through my composure. "Why are you doing this? We gave you everything. We paid for your college. We helped with your down payment. Why is your mother sleeping in a laundry room? Why is she eating garbage?" Gabrielle laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Gave me everything. You gave me a middle-class life, Dad. You gave me mediocrity. You wanted me to be a teacher or a nurse. You never understood ambition. Lachlan understands ambition. He is going to be a senator one day. We are building an empire built on your mother's blood," I said. Gabrielle waved her hand dismissively. "Mom is fine. She is just confused. We are managing her." "Managing her?" "You are drugging her, Gabrielle. I saw the needle. I saw you hold her down." She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were hard like flint. "Listen to me, old man. Lachlan made some bad investments. The market turned on him. We were going to lose everything. The house, the cars, the reputation. We needed liquidity, fast liquidity. And you two were just sitting in that big house in Atlanta, rotting away with all that equity tied up in brick and mortar. It was selfish. I felt the ground sway beneath my feet. What did you say? We sold it? Gabrielle said casually, checking her fingernails. We sold the house in Atlanta last week. The power of attorney you signed gave us full rights. The money is already in Lachlan's offshore accounts. It saved us, Dad. You should be proud. You finally contributed to my success. I could not breathe. That house. I had built that house with my own hands. I had laid the foundation. I had framed the walls. Esther and I had planted the oak tree in the front yard the day Gabrielle was born. It was not just a house. It was 40 years of memories. It was our sanctuary, and she had sold it to cover a gambling debt. You sold our home, I whispered. Where did you think we would live? You are not going to live anywhere, Gabrielle said, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. That is the plan. Mom is already halfway gone. The drugs we are giving her are degrading her cognitive functions permanently. In a month or two, she will have a tragic accident. Maybe she falls down the stairs. Maybe she leaves the gas on. And then the life insurance pays out. I stared at her in horror. This was not greed. This was evil. Pure distilled evil. And you, she continued, poking a finger into my chest. You are the problem. You were supposed to just die quietly of a heart attack or something, but you had to come here. You had to play the hero. Well, guess what? No one believes you. The police think you are crazy. The neighbors think you are violent. If you try to expose us, I will tell the doctors to up Mom's dosage. I will turn her into a vegetable before you can even file a police report. Do you understand me? She was holding her own mother hostage. She was using Esther's suffering as leverage to silence me. I looked at this woman. I remembered holding her when she was a baby, promising to protect her from the world. I had failed. I had protected her so well that she had never learned the value of struggle. I had raised a wolf and invited it into my home. So that is it, I said, my voice trembling. It was not fear. It was the final death rattle of my love for her. You are going to kill us for money. It is not just money, Dad, she spat. It is survival. In this world, you are either the predator or the prey. I am done being prey. I am done being the black girl who has to work twice as hard. With this money, with Lachlan's connections, we are going to be untouchable. And I am not going to let two old people drag me back down to mediocrity. She looked at her watch. I am late. Move your car. Go back to Atlanta. Find a cheap apartment. Live off your Social Security. Forget you have a daughter. Because if you come near my house again, I swear to God, the next time you see Mom, it will be at the morgue. She put her sunglasses back on. The mask was back in place. I stood there for a long moment. I let my shoulders slump. I let my face crumble. I needed her to believe she had won. I needed her to believe I was broken. Okay, I said softly. You win, Gabrielle. Please, just do not hurt her anymore. I will go. I will leave today. Just let her live. Gabrielle smirked. It was a look of total victory. Smart choice, Daddy. Goodbye. She walked around me, got into her car, and slammed the door. I moved my sedan. I watched her drive away, heading toward the market to buy organic vegetables with the money she had stolen from her parents' blood. I waited until she was out of sight. Then I reached into the breast pocket of my suit jacket. My hand was shaking not from age, but from adrenaline. I pulled out my phone. The screen was glowing. The voice recording app was still running. I pressed stop. I looked at the file. 20 minutes of audio. Every word, every threat. The confession about the house, the admission of the drugs, the plan to commit insurance fraud. It was all there. I sat in the driver's seat and exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding since I arrived in Connecticut. I played back a section. Gabrielle's voice filled the car, crisp and clear. In a month or two, she will have a tragic accident. I closed my eyes. A single tear rolled down my cheek. It was the last tear I would shed for Gabrielle. I did not just record a crime. I had recorded the death of my daughter. The person who drove away in that Mercedes was not my child. She was a target. I put the car in gear. I was not going back to Atlanta. I was going to see Marcus Vance. I was going to verify the sale of the house. And then I was going to weave a net so tight that when I pulled it, Gabrielle and Lachlan would not just be caught. They would be crushed. Goodbye, Gabrielle. I whispered to the empty parking lot. You wanted to be a predator. You forgot that there is always a bigger beast in the jungle, and you just woke him up. I drove out of the parking lot. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold mechanical precision. I had the evidence. Now I needed the trap, and I knew exactly how to bait it. The engineer was back at work, and this demolition project was going to be my masterpiece. The office of Marcus Vance was a fortress of silence in the middle of a chaotic city. It smelled of old leather and expensive scotch, the kind of place where fortunes were protected and enemies were dismantled legally. I sat in a high-backed mahogany chair watching my old fraternity brother read through the stack of documents I had retrieved from the public records office earlier that morning. Marcus was 72, just like me, but his eyes were sharp and predatory. He did not look like a man who had retired. He looked like a shark waiting for blood in the water. He flipped a page, then another, his frown deepening with every line. I waited. As an engineer, I knew how to read blueprints, but Marcus knew how to read the architecture of a crime. Finally, he took off his reading glasses and looked at me. The silence in the room was heavy. "Franklin," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "you were right. They are not just living beyond their means. They are drowning." He turned the laptop screen toward me. It was a forensic accounting report on Lachlan Vance's real estate firm. The numbers were red, deep arterial red. "Lachlan Vance is a fraud," Marcus explained, tapping the screen with a manicured finger. "He has been running a Ponzi scheme disguised as a luxury property fund. He took deposits from investors for a high-rise project in downtown Hartford that does not even have permits yet. He used that money to pay off the interest on his personal loans. But the investors are getting restless. 2 of them filed lawsuits last week. He needs $4 million by the end of the month to avoid a federal indictment for wire fraud." I looked at the numbers. $4 million. That was exactly the estimated value of my property in Atlanta, combined with my retirement portfolio. "The sale of your house in Atlanta was not a lifestyle choice." Marcus continued, sliding a printout across the desk. "It was a panic move. They sold it for 20% under market value to a cash buyer. The money hit their account on Tuesday. On Wednesday, it was gone. Transferred directly to a shell company in the Cayman Islands to hide it from his creditors here." I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. My home. The place where I had taught Gabrielle to ride a bike. The place where Esther planted her garden every spring. It was gone. Liquidated to cover the gambling debts of a man who called me boy behind my back. But that is not the worst part, Franklin. Marcus opened a second file. This one was thinner, but it felt heavier. He hesitated before pushing it toward me. "We found this in the state insurance database," he said softly. "I need you to brace yourself." I opened the folder. Inside were 3 life insurance policies. 1 for me, 2 for Esther. They were taken out 6 months ago, right after we signed the power of attorney documents. I scanned the terms. The premiums were astronomical. No rational person would buy policies this expensive unless they were certain they would not have to pay the premiums for very long. I looked at the payout clause, $5 million per person. But there was a rider attached to the policy, a specific clause that made my blood run cold. Double indemnity for accidental death within the home. If Esther or I died from natural causes, the payout was standard. But if we died from a household accident, a fall down the stairs, a fire, a carbon monoxide leak, the payout doubled to $10 million. I dropped the paper. My hands were shaking. This was not financial planning. This was a bounty. "It is a blueprint for murder," I whispered. Marcus nodded slowly. "It explains everything, Franklin. It explains why they are drugging her. They need her to be disoriented. They need her to have a history of falls and confusion. If she falls down the stairs tomorrow, the autopsy will show high levels of sedatives. But since they have that forged diagnosis of dementia from Dr. Albright, the coroner will rule it as an accidental fall caused by her condition. They have created a perfect narrative. The tragic decline of a beloved mother. I thought about the slippery marble floors in that house. I thought about the steep staircase leading to the basement. I thought about the gas stove in the kitchen. Every inch of that mansion was a weapon waiting to be used. "They are not waiting for us to die," I said, my voice rising. "They are manufacturing an accident." Marcus leaned forward. "We have enough here to start a criminal investigation. But these things take time, Franklin. We need to file an injunction. We need to get a judge to sign a warrant for Esther's removal. It could take 48 hours. I stood up. "I do not have 48 hours. I might not have 48 minutes. "Sit down," Franklin Marcus ordered. "You cannot go back there." If you violate that restraining order, you play right into their hands. They will lock you up, and then who saves Esther? We have to do this by the book. I looked at my friend. I respected the law. I had followed the rules my whole life. I paid my taxes. I obeyed the speed limit. I was a good citizen. And where had it gotten me? My wife was being tortured in a laundry room, and my daughter was planning to cash in on our corpses. The law was too slow for the devil I was fighting. I picked up the copies of the insurance policies and shoved them into my jacket pocket. I will wait for the Judge Marcus, but I need to be close. I walked out of his office before he could stop me. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like an eternity. My mind was racing, calculating probabilities and structural weaknesses. I was no longer an engineer building bridges. I was a demolition expert looking for the fuse. I stepped out onto the busy street. The sun was shining, people were laughing, eating lunch, living their lives. They had no idea that a few miles away in a gated community, a woman was being prepped for slaughter. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a single vibration. I pulled it out. It was a text message from a number I did not have saved, but I knew who it was, Russo. The message was short, 3 sentences that stopped my heart. The maid and the cook were just sent home early. Lachlan is in the basement with a tool bag. He is messing with the pilot light on the furnace. I stared at the screen. The furnace. A gas leak. It was the oldest trick in the book. Odorless, invisible, silent. They would drug Esther, leave her in the laundry room right next to the utility closet, and go out to dinner. By the time they came back, the house would be filled with gas. A spark from the thermostat or a light switch would be enough. Or maybe just the suffocation would do it. A tragic accident. An old woman with dementia left the gas on. I did not go to my rental car. I did not call the police. The police would take 20 minutes to arrive, and then they would waste another 20 minutes arguing with Lachlan at the gate while he smiled and showed them his permits. By then, the spark might have already happened. I ran toward the subway station. I needed to get to the edge of the woods. I needed to get back to that house. The time for gathering evidence was over. The time for law and order was over. I texted Russo back. Do not let them leave. I am coming. I checked my pocket. I had a multi-tool I always carried. It had a screwdriver, a pliers, and a small blade. It was not a weapon, it was a tool. But tonight, in the hands of a man who had nothing left to lose, it was going to be the difference between life and death. I boarded the train, my reflection in the window looking back at me. I looked old. I looked tired. But beneath the gray hair and the wrinkles, the fire was burning hot. Lachlan Vance thought he was a smart man. He thought he had calculated every variable, but he had forgotten the most dangerous variable of all. A husband who has seen the face of the man who wants to kill his wife. I am coming for you, Lachlan, I thought as the train accelerated into the dark tunnel, and I am bringing hell with me. The moon was buried behind a thick wall of clouds as I sprinted through the tree line. My lungs burned. My 70-year-old knees screamed with every impact against the uneven ground. But I did not slow down. I could not. The text message from Russo was burning a hole in my pocket. Lachlan was in the basement. The gas was on. My wife was minutes away from suffocating in her sleep. I reached the edge of the manicured lawn. The house loomed above me like a mausoleum. It was dark. Too dark. Even the porch lights were off. They wanted it to look like everyone was asleep. They wanted the explosion to look like a tragedy that happened while the family was dreaming. I bypassed the front door. I knew from the blueprints of colonial houses like this that the basement access would be on the north side, usually a half window near the ground. I found it behind a row of neatly trimmed boxwood hedges. It was locked. I did not have time to pick it. I took off my suit jacket and wrapped it around my fist. I looked around to ensure the private security patrol was not nearby. Then I punched the glass. The sound was a dull thud followed by the tinkle of falling shards. I waited. Silence. No alarm. They must have disabled the sensors in the basement to avoid triggering a police response while they set the trap. Their arrogance was my entry ticket. I cleared the jagged glass from the frame and squeezed through. I dropped 5 feet onto the concrete floor. The landing jarred my spine, shooting a bolt of pain up my back. I gritted my teeth and stood up. Then the smell hit me. It was thick and heavy. The artificial scent of rotten eggs added to natural gas. Mercaptan. It was already strong. That meant the pilot light was out and the valve was wide open. I pulled my shirt up over my nose. 1 spark. That was all it would take. The click of a refrigerator compressor. A static shock from a carpet. And this entire house would become a crater. I moved through the darkness, guided by the hiss of escaping gas. It sounded like a snake coiling in the dark. I turned the corner into the utility room. There was a flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Lachlan was standing by the massive furnace. He was holding a wrench, tinkering with the main supply line. He was not just letting the pilot light go out. He was disconnecting the safety valve entirely. He wanted to ensure maximum saturation. I stepped into the light. "Turn it off, Lachlan," I said. My voice was calm, but it vibrated with a lethal frequency. Lachlan spun around. The wrench clattered in his hand. He shined the light in my face, blinding me for a second. "Franklin," he stammered, his voice cracked. "You are supposed to be in Atlanta. You have a restraining order." "I am not in Atlanta," I said, stepping forward. "And you are not going to kill my wife." Lachlan's shock evaporated, instantly replaced by a sneer. He realized I was alone. He realized I was old. He looked at the wrench in his hand, then at me. He laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "You broke into my house, Franklin. You are trespassing. The law says I can shoot intruders, but I think I will just beat you to death and leave you here. The gas will take care of the evidence. It will look like you broke in to sabotage the furnace and blew yourself up." It is poetic, really. He lunged. Lachlan was 30 years younger than me. He played tennis on weekends. He went to a fancy gym. He was fast. He swung the heavy pipe wrench at my head. I did not try to block it. I was an engineer. I knew about force vectors. I stepped inside his swing. The wrench whistled past my ear, missing me by an inch. I slammed my shoulder into his chest. It was like hitting a brick wall, but I had momentum. We crashed onto the concrete floor. The flashlight spun away, casting crazy shadows on the ceiling. Lachlan was strong. He drove a knee into my ribs. I felt something crack. The pain was blinding, white-hot and sharp. "Die, you old leech!" Lachlan screamed, bringing his fist down on my face. My lip burst. Blood filled my mouth. He hit me again. My vision swam. He was on top of me, his hands reaching for my throat. He was going to strangle me right there on the cold floor, but Lachlan made a mistake. He thought this was a boxing match. He thought I would fight fair. I did not fight fair. I fought like a man who had survived construction sites in the 70s. I fought for survival. My hand groped across the floor. I found what I was looking for, the pipe wrench he had dropped. I did not swing it at his head. That was amateur. I gripped the handle and swung it low, aiming for the structural weakness of the human body. I brought the heavy iron down hard on his kneecap. The sound was sickening. A wet crunch of bone and cartilage shattering. Lachlan howled. It was a sound not of a man, but of an animal in a trap. He rolled off me, clutching his legs, screaming in agony. "My leg! You broke my leg!" I rolled over, gasping for air. The gas fumes were making me dizzy. I stood up, swaying. My ribs were on fire. My face was dripping blood. I looked down at him. He was writhing on the floor, helpless. I picked up the wrench. I raised it high. For 1 second, one terrible second, I wanted to bring it down on his skull. I wanted to end him. The rage was so powerful it shook my bones. But I stopped. If I killed him, I was a murderer. If I killed him, the truth died with him. I lowered the wrench. I walked over to the gas main. My hands were slippery with blood, but I gripped the valve. I turned it clockwise. It groaned rusted and stiff, but I forced it. The hissing stopped. I looked at Lachlan. He was sobbing, trying to crawl away. "Stay there," I rasped. "The police are coming, and this time they are going to find you exactly where you belong, on the ground." I turned and ran up the stairs. I burst into the kitchen. The air was clearer here, but still tainted. I ran to the laundry room. The door was locked from the outside. I kicked it. Once, twice. The wood splintered. I shoulders through. Esther was on the cot. She was so still. I rushed to her side, putting 2 fingers against her neck. A pulse. It was faint, fluttering like a trapped bird. But it was there. "Esther, baby," I whispered. "I am here." I scooped her up in my arms. She was lighter than I remembered. She had lost so much weight in 2 weeks. Her head lolled against my chest. She smelled of stale sweat and chemicals. My heart broke all over again, but I shoved the grief down. I had to move. I carried her through the kitchen. My ribs screamed in protest with every step. I was 70 years old, carrying my wife, bleeding from the mouth, my chest possibly fractured. But I did not feel the weight. I felt only the mission. I kicked the back door open. The fresh night air hit us like a blessing. I ran across the lawn to the back gate where Russo's car was idling. Russo jumped out. He saw the blood on my face. He saw Esther's limp body. Jesus, Franklin. Is she alive? Take her, I shouted, passing Esther into his arms. Take her to the hospital. St. Mary's. It is out of the county. Do not go to the local one. They know Lachlan there. Go, Russo put her gently in the back seat. He looked at me. Get in. We have to go. No, I said, stepping back. What? Russo screamed. The police are coming. I hear the sirens. If they find you here, they will arrest you. That is the point, I said, wiping blood from my chin. If I run, I am a fugitive. I am the crazy old man who kidnapped his wife. If I stay, I am the man who broke in to save her. I need to be arrested, Russo. I need a trial. A trial is public. A trial is where I can show the evidence. Russo looked at me. He understood. He saw the madness and the brilliance in my eyes. You are a crazy son of a bitch, Franklin, he said, his voice trembling. Go, I roared. Save my wife. Russo jumped in the car and peeled away tires, screeching. I watched the tail lights disappear into the night. I was alone. The sirens were deafening now. Blue and red lights washed over the lawn, illuminating the blood on my shirt. I turned back to the house. Lachlan was still in the basement, probably calling 911, spinning his web of lies. I did not run. I walked to the front porch steps. I sat down. I took out my phone. I sent one text to Marcus Vance. It is done. I am at the house. Get the bail money ready. I put the phone on the step beside me. I placed the pipe wrench next to it. I clasped my hands together. They were shaking, but not from fear, from the adrenaline leaving my system. A police cruiser jumped the curb and screeched to a halt on the grass. 2 officers jumped out, guns drawn. Flashlights blinded me. Drop the weapon. Put your hands in the air. I looked at them. I did not blink. I slowly raised my bloodied hands. Officer, I said, my voice steady and loud over the sirens. My name is Franklin Moore. I just broke into this house. I assaulted the owner, and I saved a life. You can take me in now, but make sure you read me my rights, because I am going to need them. As they slammed me against the hood of the car, I did not feel defeated. I felt the cold steel of the handcuffs, but this time they did not feel like shackles. They felt like the opening bell of the final round. I had thrown the first punch. Now let the world see who was left standing. The media called me the madman of Emerald Hills. For 3 days, I sat in a holding cell while the world outside spun a narrative that had nothing to do with the truth. On the small television mounted in the corner of the cell block, I watched the local news reports. They showed Lachlan Vance leaving the hospital in a wheelchair, his leg encased in a fresh white cast. He looked tragic and handsome. He told the reporters that he forgave me. He said that dementia was a cruel disease and that he prayed I would get the help I needed. He was not just lying, he was performing. He was building a stage where he was the martyr and I was the villain. When the day of the arraignment arrived, the courthouse was a circus. Reporters were camped out on the steps, hungry for a glimpse of the violent grandfather who had attacked a pillar of the community. I was led in through the back entrance wearing an orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent. My wrists were shackled to my waist. I walked with my head high. I did not look at the cameras. I looked straight ahead. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension and the smell of floor wax. The gallery was packed. I saw Gabrielle sitting in the front row. She was wearing a black dress and oversized sunglasses, crying into a tissue. It was a perfect performance. She did not look at me. She looked at Lachlan, who was sitting at the prosecution table next to a lawyer who cost more per hour than I made in a month. The prosecutor was a young, ambitious man who saw this case as a stepping stone to a political career. He did not waste time. He painted a picture of a chaotic, violent night. He described how I had smashed a window. He described how I had brutally assaulted a defenseless homeowner. He described how I had kidnapped an elderly woman. He used words like unhinged and dangerous. He waved the police report in the air like a weapon. He demanded that I be held without bail. He demanded a psychiatric evaluation. He wanted to lock me away in a facility where no one would ever hear my voice again. Lachlan sat there nodding solemnly. He dabbed at his eyes when the prosecutor described the terror of the night. He looked at the jury box even though there was no jury yet. He was charming the room. He was winning. Then it was Marcus Vance's turn. Marcus stood up slowly. He did not have the flash of the prosecutor. He had the weight of 50 years of criminal law behind him. He walked to the center of the room. He did not look at the judge. He looked at Lachlan. Your Honor, Marcus began, his voice low and rumbling like thunder. The defense does not deny that Franklin Moore broke a window. We do not deny that he struck Mr. Vance. We do not deny that he removed his wife from the premises. A murmur went through the crowd. Gabrielle looked up surprised. Lachlan smirked. They thought we were pleading guilty. They thought I had given up. But Marcus turned to the judge. But we argue that these actions were not crimes. They were a rescue mission. We invoke the defense of necessity. A man is allowed to break a law to prevent a greater evil. And the evil in that house was not my client. It was a murder in progress. Objection, the prosecutor shouted, jumping to his feet. This is absurd. There is no evidence of any danger to the victim. Marcus smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. Actually, there is. Marcus walked back to his table and picked up a single file folder. It was the report from St. Mary's Hospital, the hospital where Russo had taken Esther, the hospital that was outside of Lachlan's sphere of influence. We have the toxicology report for Esther Moore taken 3 hours after the incident, Marcus said, his voice projecting to the back of the room. The prosecution claims Mrs. Moore suffers from dementia. They claim she is confused, but the blood test tells a different story. He handed the file to the bailiff, who walked it up to the bench. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Patterson, put on her glasses. She opened the file. At the time of her admission, Marcus continued, Esther Moore had a blood concentration of benzodiazepines and synthetic opioids that was 5 times the therapeutic limit. She was not suffering from dementia, Your Honor. She was suffering from acute chemical poisoning. The drugs in her system are not prescribed for memory loss. They are used for severe sedation in psychiatric wards. And if she had remained in that house for another hour with the gas valve open, as we will prove it was, she would have been too sedated to wake up. She would have suffocated in her sleep. The courtroom went silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy. Gabrielle stopped crying. She went pale. Lachlan stopped nodding. His hand gripped the arm of his wheelchair so hard his knuckles turned white. The judge looked up from the file. Her eyes were hard. She looked at the prosecutor. Do you have an explanation for this, counselor? She asked. The prosecutor stammered. He looked at Lachlan. Lachlan whispered furiously into his own lawyer's ear. Lachlan's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, this is speculation. Mrs. Moore is under medical care. Perhaps there was a dosage error. This does not justify a violent assault. A dosage error. Marcus countered, his voice rising. 5 times the lethal limit is not an error. It is an execution method. And we have a witness, a neighbor who saw the defendants injecting Mrs. Moore against her will. Lachlan's face lost its mask of tragedy. For the first time, the charm cracked. I saw the predator underneath. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I looked back at him and I smiled. It was a small, cold smile. I wanted him to know that I was the one who had put that fear in his eyes. The judge closed the file. She took off her glasses. This court takes these allegations very seriously, she said. I am ordering an immediate independent investigation into the medical care of Esther Moore. She is to remain in the protective custody of the state at St. Mary's Hospital until this matter is resolved. No family members, including the defendant and the plaintiffs, are to have contact with her. She looked at me. As for Mr. Moore, considering the extenuating circumstances, I am granting bail. $5,000. He is to remain in the state and surrender his passport. The gavel banged down. It sounded like a gunshot. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were shouting questions. The prosecutor looked defeated. But I only watched Lachlan. He was not looking at the judge. He was looking at his lawyer, talking fast and angry. He was pointing at me. He was losing control. The narrative was slipping away from him. He was no longer the victim. He was a suspect. I stood up as the bailiff uncuffed me. My wrists felt light. I rubbed the red marks on my skin. Marcus clapped a hand on my shoulder. This is just the first round, Franklin, he whispered. They are going to come back hard. They are going to try to discredit the blood test. They are going to say she was an addict. They are going to get dirty. Let them, I said. I am ready to get dirty. As I walked out of the courtroom down the center aisle, I had to pass by the prosecution table. Lachlan wheeled his chair back to block my path for a second. His lawyer tried to pull him back, but Lachlan leaned in. You think you won, old man, he hissed. His breath smelled of mints and rot. You just signed her death warrant. I have friends in the medical board. I have friends in the press. You have nothing but a rap sheet from the 70s. I stopped. I looked down at him. I have the truth, Lachlan, I said quietly. And I have a pipe wrench. And next time I won't aim for the knee. I walked past him. I pushed through the doors into the hallway where the cameras were flashing. I did not hide my face this time. I looked directly into the lens of the nearest camera. I wanted the world to see me. I wanted them to see a man who was not afraid. But as I walked down the courthouse steps into the blinding afternoon sun, I felt a chill. Lachlan's threat had been specific. He mentioned my rap sheet from the 70s. He was digging into my past. He was going to try to paint me as a violent radical to discredit my testimony. He was going to use my history of fighting for civil rights against me. He was going to twist my honor into shame. I got into Marcus's car. "What do we do now?" Marcus asked, starting the engine. "We go to the hospital," I said. "I need to see Esther, even if I have to stand outside her window." We drove away, leaving the chaos of the courthouse behind. But I knew the war had just shifted fronts. Lachlan was wounded, and a wounded animal is the most dangerous kind. He would not attack me physically again. He would attack my character. He would try to turn the public against me before the trial even started. He was going to dig up every skeleton I had buried. But he didn't know that I had buried those skeletons myself. And I wasn't afraid of them. If he wanted to fight in the mud, I would drag him down so deep he would never see the sun again. The trial had begun, but the real verdict would be delivered in the streets. And I was just getting started. The morning after my arraignment, I learned that a lie travels halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. I was sitting in the small waiting room of Marcus Vance's office, staring at the television mounted on the wall. It was a local morning talk show, the kind that usually featured cooking segments and weather reports. But today, they had a special guest. My daughter Gabrielle sat on a beige sofa holding a tissue. She was wearing a high-necked black dress that made her look fragile and pious. She did not look like the woman who had sneered at me in the parking lot. She looked like a broken child. The host, a woman with sympathetic eyes, leaned forward and asked her about her childhood. Gabrielle looked directly into the camera. "It was hard to talk about," she whispered, her voice trembling perfectly. "My father was a pillar of the community on the outside. But inside our home, it was a reign of terror. He was controlling. He was violent. If I got a B on my report card, he would lock me in the basement for hours. He used to hit my mother if dinner wasn't on the table at exactly 6 o'clock. I felt the blood drain from my face. I gripped the armrest of the chair so hard the leather creaked. I had never locked her in a basement. I had never raised a hand to Esther in 40 years. We were a family that laughed. We were a family that danced in the kitchen while cooking Sunday dinner. Gabrielle was rewriting our entire history, turning my love into abuse and my discipline into torture." The host gasped. And this latest incident, Gabrielle wiped a tear. "He has been spiraling since he retired. He became obsessed with money. When he found out my husband and I were successful, he demanded we support him. When we refused, he snapped. He attacked Lachlan. He kidnapped Mom because he wants control of her pension. He is not a hero. He is a monster who has terrorized us for decades." I stood up and walked out of the office. I could not watch anymore. I walked onto the street, needing air, but the air was poisoned. People on the sidewalk recognized me from the news. A woman pulling a grocery cart stopped and spat at my feet. A man in a business suit crossed the street to avoid walking near me. I checked my phone. My bank app showed a notification. My accounts had been frozen pending an investigation into elder abuse and financial misconduct. Lachlan had weaponized my own daughter against me. He knew that in the court of public opinion, a crying white-collar daughter beats a stoic black father every time. He had stripped me of my reputation, my money, and my history. I walked to a park bench and sat down. I was isolated. I was the villain in my own life story. For a moment, I felt a crushing weight of despair. Maybe I should just give up. Maybe I should plead guilty and beg for mercy. "Excuse me, sir." I looked up. A woman was standing over me. She was white, in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a tailored gray coat that looked expensive but old, like it had been bought 10 years ago and cared for meticulously. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her jaw was set like granite. "I am not signing autographs," I said, bitterly looking away. "I know you are not the monster they say you are," she said. Her voice was steady. I watched the interview. I saw how she cried. It was a good performance, almost as good as the one my son-in-law gave 5 years ago. I looked back at her. "Who are you?" "My name is Margaret Sterling," she said, sitting down on the other end of the bench. She placed a heavy leather handbag between us. "And I think we share a common enemy." I narrowed my eyes. "Is this a trap? Did Lachlan send you?" "Lachlan Vance destroyed my life," Margaret said. She opened her handbag and pulled out a photo. It was a picture of a beautiful young woman with blonde hair smiling on a sailboat. A man had his arm around her. The man was younger, thinner, and had more hair, but it was him. It was Lachlan. "This was my daughter Sarah," she said, touching the photo with a trembling finger. "She met Lachlan 7 years ago in Boston. He was charming. He was a real estate prodigy. He swept her off her feet. They were married in 6 months. I listened the noise of the city fading away. Sarah had a trust fund," Margaret continued. "My late husband left her a substantial inheritance. Lachlan said he wanted to invest it for her. He said he wanted to build them a future. I trusted him. He called me Mom. He came to Thanksgiving. He carved the turkey." She took a deep breath, steadying herself against the pain of the memory. "Then Sarah started getting sick. She was always tired. She started falling down. She called me, slurring her words. Lachlan told me she was drinking. He told me she had developed a pill problem. He said he was trying to get her help, but she was resistant. He isolated her. He moved them to a house in the countryside far away from her friends." The pattern. It was the exact same pattern. The isolation, the accusations of addiction, the medical gaslighting. I tried to visit Margaret, said her voice cracking. But Lachlan got a restraining order. He told the judge I was an overbearing mother who was enabling Sarah's addiction. He cut me off. 6 months later, I got a call. There was a fire at the farmhouse. My heart stopped. A fire. They said it was an accident, Margaret whispered, tears finally spilling over. They said Sarah had passed out while smoking in bed. She didn't smoke. My daughter hated cigarettes. But the autopsy showed high levels of sedatives and alcohol in her system. The insurance paid out double indemnity for accidental death. Lachlan got $4 million. He cremated her before I could demand a second autopsy. He sold the land and vanished. She turned to me. Her eyes were burning with a hatred that matched my own. "I have been tracking him for 5 years. He changed his last name. He changed his location. But I never stopped looking. When I saw your face on the news, when I heard about the gas leak and the drugs, I knew. He is doing it again. He is recycling the same script." I looked at the photo of Sarah. I looked at Margaret. I reached out and took her hand. It was cold, but her grip was strong. "He thinks he got away with it," I said. "He did get away with it," Margaret replied. "But he made a mistake this time. He left a survivor. Your wife is alive, and you are alive." She reached into her bag again and pulled out a thick envelope. "This is everything I have," she said. "Private investigator reports from 5 years ago, copies of the old insurance policies, affidavits from Sarah's friends stating she never smoked. The police in Boston closed the case, but this establishes a pattern. It proves he is a serial predator. It proves his modus operandi." I took the envelope. It felt heavy, not with paper, but with justice. This was the missing piece. This was the weapon that would cut through Gabrielle's lies and Lachlan's charm. "He is trying to destroy my name," I said, standing up. "He is trying to make me look like a criminal." "Let him try," Margaret said, standing up with me. "He is fighting a man who has nothing to lose, and now that man has an army." "You are coming with me," I said, "to my lawyer. We need to get this on record." "I am ready," Margaret said. "I have been ready for 5 years." As we walked away from the park bench, I looked at the city around me. The people still stared. The world still thought I was a monster, but it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't fighting for their approval. I was fighting for Esther. I was fighting for Sarah. I was fighting for every parent who had been used and discarded by a child they loved. Lachlan Vance had started a fire thinking he could burn us all down. He didn't realize that fire spreads, and he was standing in the middle of a drought. I checked my watch. It was 2 in the afternoon. Court would reconvene in the morning. Gabrielle had had her moment in the spotlight. She had cried her crocodile tears. But tomorrow the show would change. Tomorrow we wouldn't just be defending my actions. We would be putting a murderer on trial. I looked at Margaret. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she said, her face grim. "Just promise me one thing. When you take him down, make sure he doesn't get up." "I promise," I said. And for the first time in days, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who just found the scent of blood. The law is a shield, but greed is a weapon, and I was about to hand Lachlan Vance a loaded gun with the barrel pointed straight at his own chest. We sat in the conference room of Marcus Vance's office with the blinds drawn against the afternoon sun. The room was filled with the hum of the air conditioner and the smell of fresh ink. On the table lay the bait. It was a stack of documents so perfectly forged that they could have fooled the governor of Texas. Marcus had called in a favor from an old contact in the oil and gas industry. The paperwork detailed a dormant plot of land in West Texas that Esther and I had supposedly purchased 30 years ago for pennies. According to the geological survey we had just cooked up, the land was sitting on top of a massive shale deposit. The estimated value of the mineral rights was $2.5 million. But the kicker was the buyer. We had created a shell company called Red Rock Energy that had sent a formal letter of intent to purchase the land immediately for cash. The timing was the key. Lachlan was drowning. The forensic accountant had confirmed that he had 3 days to pay back his angry investors or face federal fraud charges. He needed money. He needed it fast. And he needed it clean. Marcus looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Are you sure about this, Franklin?" he asked. "Once we send this disclosure to his lawyer, there is no turning back. We are legally obligated to disclose all assets during the discovery phase of the trial. If they find out it is fake before he signs the admission of guilt, we go to jail for fraud." I looked at the map of the non-existent oil field. I traced the line of the property with my finger. "He won't check," I said, my voice steady. "He is arrogant. He thinks I am a senile old man who forgot he owned a gold mine. And more importantly, he is desperate. A desperate man does not look at the teeth of the horse that is coming to save him. He just jumps in the saddle." "Send it," I ordered. Marcus nodded and pressed the send button on his laptop. The email went to Lachlan's high-priced defense attorney. Attached was the asset disclosure form listing the Texas property and the urgent purchase offer from Red Rock Energy. We waited. The silence in the room was heavy. I checked my watch. It was 2 o'clock. 10 minutes later, Marcus's phone rang. He put it on speaker. It was Lachlan's lawyer. His voice was breathless, trying to sound casual, but failing. "Marcus, we just received the updated asset schedule. Is this real? Does Mr. Moore actually own unencumbered mineral rights in Texas?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, winking at me. "Yes," he replied, his voice bored. "My client forgot about it. He bought it in the 80s as a speculation. We just got the offer this morning. Honestly, Franklin is too tired to deal with it. He is thinking of just letting the offer expire and dealing with it after the trial." No, the other lawyer shouted, almost panicking. "I mean, there is no need to be hasty. If there is a cash offer on the table, it would be in everyone's best interest to secure the funds. You know, for Esther's care." I leaned in close to the microphone. I kept my voice shaky, weak. "I don't know," I stammered. "I just want this all to be over. I don't want to sell. I want my wife back." "Mr. Moore, listen to me," the lawyer said, his tone shifting to one of predatory helpfulness. "If you sell this land, you show the court you have the means to provide for her. This could help your case. Let me speak to my client. We might be able to work something out." Marcus hung up. We looked at each other. The hook was set. Now we just had to wait for the shark to smell the blood. I did not have to wait long. That evening, I was sitting in my motel room eating a sandwich that tasted like cardboard when there was a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole. It was him. Lachlan Vance stood in the hallway. He was leaning on a cane, putting weight on his good leg. He was wearing a casual sweater, trying to look harmless. He held a box of donuts. I opened the door. I did not invite him in. "What do you want, Lachlan?" I asked. He smiled. It was the smile of a salesman who sees a commission check. "Dad, can I come in? We need to talk. It is about Mom." I stepped back, letting him enter. He limped into the room, looking around at the peeling wallpaper and the stained carpet. With a sneer he quickly hid. He placed the donuts on the wobbly table. "I heard about the land in Texas," he said, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "Why didn't you tell us?" I sat in the chair, keeping my distance. I slumped my shoulders, acting defeated. "I forgot," I whispered. "It was just dirt. I didn't know about the oil." Lachlan nodded sympathetically. "Of course. Memory is a tricky thing. Look, Franklin, I have been thinking. This war between us, it is hurting everyone. It is hurting Gabrielle. It is hurting Esther. And seeing you live like this, it breaks my heart." He paused, waiting for me to react. I said nothing. I just stared at my hands. The lawyer says you have a buyer, he continued, his eyes gleaming. $2 million. That is a lot of money. It could pay for the best doctors for Mom. It could get you a nice apartment, maybe even a small house near us so you can visit. I looked up, feigning hope. You would let me visit? Lachlan leaned forward. Dad, if you sell that land and put the money into the family trust, we can drop the charges. All of them. The assault, the breaking and entering. I will tell the prosecutor it was a misunderstanding. We can be a family again. I saw the greed pulsing in his neck vein. He did not want the money for Esther. He needed it to save his own skin. He thought he was manipulating me. He thought he was playing the benevolent son-in-law, forgiving the crazy old man in exchange for control of the fortune. But I can't sell it, I said. Why not? He snapped, his patience fraying for a split second before he recovered. Because the deed is in both our names, I said. Esther and Franklin Moore. I can't sell it without her signature. And the court said I can't see her. The court said she is incompetent. If she is incompetent, she can't sign. The deal dies. Lachlan froze. He calculated the variables. If the deal died, he went to prison for fraud. He needed that signature. She is having a good day today, he said quickly. I spoke to the doctors. They say she is lucid. If we go to her together, if we explain it is for the family, she will sign. I can get the notary. I stood up slowly. I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. I needed to sell the performance of a lifetime. I don't know, Lachlan. I am tired of fighting. I just want peace. We all want peace, Dad, Lachlan said, standing up and putting a hand on my shoulder. Sell the land. Sign the money over to the trust management account. I will handle everything. You won't have to worry about a bill ever again. I turned to look at him. I saw the desperation behind his eyes. He was terrified of the deadline. He was terrified of being poor. Okay, I said softly. I will do it. Lachlan exhaled. It was the sound of a man who thought he had just won the lottery. Great. I will call the lawyers. We can do it tomorrow morning. No, I said sharply. He stiffened. What? Not tomorrow morning, I said, straightening my back just a little. And not in a lawyer's office. Then where, he asked, confused. I want to do it properly. I want a party. Lachlan laughed. A nervous, incredulous laugh. A party. Are you joking? I am not joking, I said, my voice hardening. You destroyed my reputation, Lachlan. You went on television and told the world I was a monster. You told them I was broke and crazy. If I am going to sign over $2 million to you, I want people to see that we are reconciled. I want a public apology. Lachlan narrowed his eyes. He was suspicious, but the clock was ticking. What kind of party? The party you are throwing on Friday, I said. The investor gala. I saw the invitation on Gabrielle's social media. Lachlan paled. That was his big night, the night he was supposed to woo new investors. Having his crazy father-in-law there was a risk. I want to come, I said. I want you to bring Esther. I want to sign the papers in front of your friends and business partners. I want you to shake my hand and tell everyone that Franklin Moore is a good man. That is the price. Take it or leave it. Lachlan paced the small room. He was trapped. If he refused, the deal died and he went to jail. If he agreed, he risked a scene at his party. But his arrogance won out. He looked at me, an old man in a cheap suit living in a motel. He thought he could control me. He thought that once the papers were signed, he could just have security throw me out. Fine, he said. Friday night, you and Mom, we sign the papers. You give a toast about family unity, and then the money is transferred. And the charges, I asked. Drop the moment the ink is dry, he promised. He held out his hand. I looked at it. The hand that had injected my wife with poison. The hand that had tried to strangle me. I wanted to break his fingers. Instead, I shook it. His grip was sweaty. Mine was dry and hard as stone. Deal, I said. Lachlan grabbed his cane and limped to the door. He paused, turning back with a smirk. You are doing the right thing, Franklin. Finally being useful. Get a haircut before Friday. You look like a convict. He left. I locked the door. I waited until I heard his car drive away. Then I collapsed onto the bed, not from exhaustion, but from relief. He had taken the bait. He was bringing Esther to the party. He was bringing the notary. He was creating the stage. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. He agreed, I said. Friday night, the gala. Marcus let out a low whistle. You are playing a dangerous game, Franklin. If anything goes wrong, if the notary realizes the land doesn't exist before you sign. Nothing will go wrong, I said. Because I am not going to sign those papers, Marcus. I reached into my bag and pulled out a different stack of papers. The real documents, the medical records, the police reports from Margaret, the affidavit from the forensic accountant. I am not going there to sell a gold mine, I told Marcus. I am going there to bury a snake. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I did not sleep. I met with Margaret in the back of a diner. We went over the plan. She was terrified but resolute. She would be there disguised as one of the catering staff thanks to Russo's connections. I went to the barber. I got a shave and a haircut. I went to a tailor and bought a new suit. Not a cheap one. A midnight blue wool suit that fit me like armor. I polished my shoes until I could see my reflection in them. I looked into my own eyes in the mirror. Franklin Moore was gone. The man in the mirror was an executioner. Friday arrived with a storm brewing over the coast. The sky was dark and heavy, matching the mood in my chest. I drove to the mansion. The gates opened for me this time. No police, no drama. Lachlan wanted his money. I parked the rental car among the Ferraris and Lamborghinis. I walked up the steps. The music was playing. The champagne was flowing. Inside were 100 of the wealthiest people in Connecticut. They were there to celebrate Lachlan Vance's success. They had no idea they were attending his funeral. I walked in, heads turned. The crazy father-in-law had arrived. But I did not look crazy. I looked powerful. I walked straight to the bar and ordered a sparkling water. Lachlan spotted me from across the room. He was wearing a tuxedo, smiling his fake smile. He excused himself from a group of investors and limped over to me. "You cleaned up well," he whispered, grabbing my elbow. "Mom is in the library, with the notary. Let's get this over with." "Not yet," I said, pulling my arm away. The agreement was a public signing, on the stage, in front of everyone. Lachlan gritted his teeth. "Franklin, don't push me." "I am not pushing," I said calmly. "I am just sticking to the contract." "Bring her out, Lachlan. Let everyone see how much you love your family." He glared at me for a moment, searching for any sign of treachery, but he saw only the calm face of a man ready to surrender. He nodded sharply. "Fine. 5 minutes. Then you sign, then you leave." He walked away to give the order. I watched him go. I scanned the room. I saw Margaret nodding from behind the buffet table. I saw Russo standing near the AV booth dressed as a technician. The trap was set, the doors were locked, and the architect was ready to pull the keystone. I took a sip of my water. It tasted like victory. I looked at the grand chandelier hanging above the room. It was beautiful. It was fragile, just like Lachlan's life. 5 minutes, Lachlan had said. In 5 minutes I would show him that you can't buy the truth. And you certainly can't sell a man who has already been sold down the river. I set my glass down. It was showtime. The chandelier above the grand ballroom of the Vance estate glittered like a suspended constellation of diamonds. It was a piece of glass and light that cost more than my father made in his entire lifetime of sharecropping. Below it, the elite of Connecticut milled about holding flutes of vintage champagne and laughing with the easy confidence of people who have never had to choose between paying for heat or paying for food. I stood near the entrance in my new midnight blue suit, watching them. I was the invisible man again. But tonight I was not invisible because I was beneath them. I was invisible because I was the hunter and they were the herd. Lachlan had outdone himself. He had transformed the mansion into a stage for his own vanity. There were ice sculptures carved into the shape of skyscrapers, representing the empire he claimed to be building. There was a string quartet playing soft classical music in the corner, trying to give an air of sophistication to a room built on fraud. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roasting lamb, and the metallic tang of greed. I saw Lachlan near the fireplace. He was holding court with a group of potential investors, men in tuxedos with silver hair and skepticism in their eyes. Lachlan was working them. He looked handsome in his bespoke tuxedo, leaning on his cane with a practiced air of tragic nobility. He was telling them a story I could almost hear from across the room. The story of how he overcame adversity. The story of his brilliant vision for the future. He gestured with his free hand, his smile bright and predatory. He looked like a man who had already won. His mother, Patricia, was nearby. She was wearing a red dress that was too tight and too bright for a woman of her age, but she wore it like armor. She had a glass of dark liquor in her hand, and she was laughing too loudly. She moved through the crowd, touching arms, whispering secrets, acting the part of the grande dame of society. But I saw the way her eyes darted around the room. She was nervous. She checked her watch every few minutes. She knew the timeline. She knew that without the signature I was about to provide, this entire house of cards would collapse by Monday morning. I checked my own watch. It was time. I turned and signaled to the hallway. The heavy oak doors opened. The room went silent. The chatter died down. The music faltered. All eyes turned to the entrance. I walked in, pushing the wheelchair. Esther sat in the chair. We had dressed her in her favorite Sunday dress, a soft blue silk that matched her eyes. She looked frail. Her silver hair was neatly combed, but her face was pale. Her hands rested on her lap, clutching a small black purse. She did not look at the crowd. She stared straight ahead, her expression vacant. To the people in the room, this was a touching scene. A devoted husband bringing his invalid wife to support their successful son-in-law. They murmured softly, smiling with pity. They saw a tragedy. They did not see the wire taped to the inside of Esther's collar. They did not see the tiny microphone hidden in the flower pinned to her dress. Lachlan broke away from the investors. He limped toward us, his face arranging itself into a mask of deep concern and love. He reached us in the center of the room. The spotlight hit us. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice projecting so everyone could hear. "I am so glad you could make it." He leaned down to kiss Esther on the cheek. It was a Judas kiss. "I am so happy to see you, Mom," he whispered in her ear. But I had the receiver in my pocket. And I had an earpiece deep in my right ear, hidden by my hair. I heard what he really said. "You look terrible, old woman. Just sign the paper and then you can go back to sleep forever." I kept my face stone cold. I did not flinch. I nodded at him, playing the part of the defeated old man. "We are here, Lachlan," I said, my voice quiet. "Let's get this done." Esther is tired. Patricia materialized beside us. She smelled of gin and malice. She placed a hand on Esther's shoulder, squeezing tight. "Oh, you poor dear," she said loud enough for the room to hear. "You look so tired. Let's get you settled." She leaned in close to adjust Esther's shawl. Her lips brushed Esther's ear. Through my earpiece, I heard her voice crisp and clear as a bell. "Don't embarrass us tonight, you useless invalid. If you drool on that dress, I will have you thrown in the basement with the rats." Esther did not react. She had practiced this. We had rehearsed it in the hospital room for 2 days. She had to be a statue. She had to be the ghost they thought she was. Lachlan stood up and clapped his hands. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please." The room fell completely silent. "Tonight is a special night," Lachlan announced, his voice booming with charisma. "Not only are we celebrating the launch of the new Hartford project, but we are celebrating family. My in-laws, Franklin and Esther Moore, have decided to join their assets with ours to ensure a legacy for generations to come. It is a moment of unity, a moment of trust." The crowd applauded. Polite, wealthy applause. Lachlan gestured to a table set up near the fireplace. A notary public was waiting there, looking uncomfortable in a cheap suit. A stack of documents lay on the velvet tablecloth. I pushed Esther toward the table. The wheels of the chair hummed on the marble floor. It was the longest walk of my life. Every step felt heavy with the weight of the lies in this room. I looked at the faces of the guests. They were smiling, oblivious. They were drinking champagne paid for with stolen money. They were cheering for a monster. We reached the table. I locked the brakes on the wheelchair. Lachlan placed the document in front of Esther. It was the deed transfer for the Texas land, the land that did not exist. He handed me a pen. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and black with gold trim. "You first, Franklin," he said. "Sign on the line, then help Mom sign." I took the pen. My hand trembled slightly. Lachlan saw it and smiled, thinking it was fear. He thought I was breaking. He thought he had beaten me into submission. I looked down at the paper. I looked at the signature line. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The moment that would save him from prison and make him rich again. I looked up at him. His eyes were shining with greed. He was practically vibrating with anticipation. "Go ahead, Dad," he urged softly. "Just sign it." I held the pen over the paper. The room held its breath, but I did not lower the pen. I stood up straighter. I unbuttoned my jacket. I looked Lachlan dead in the eye. "Before I sign this, Lachlan," I said, my voice carrying to the back of the room without a microphone. "I have a gift for you." Lachlan frowned. His smile faltered. "A gift?" "Yes," I said. "You said this was a celebration of family, a celebration of truth. So I brought something to honor that." I reached into my inside pocket. Lachlan tensed. He thought I was reaching for a weapon. Security guards near the wall took a step forward, but I did not pull out a gun. I pulled out a small black remote control. Lachlan looked at it confused. "What is that?" "It is the key to the future," I said. "Or maybe it is the key to the past." I pointed the remote at the massive projection screen behind the stage, the one Lachlan had been using to show graphs of his fake profits. "You wanted everyone to know the truth about our family," I said. "So, let's show them." I pressed the button. The graphs on the screen vanished. The room went dark for a second. Lachlan took a step toward me, his hand reaching out. "Franklin, what are you doing?" he hissed. "I am giving you exactly what you deserve, son." The screen flickered to life, and the silence in the room changed. It shifted from the silence of anticipation to the silence of upcoming horror. The party was over. The trial was about to begin, and the jury was everyone he had ever lied to. The massive screen behind the stage flickered once. The image of the rising stock graph, the symbol of Lachlan Vance's fake empire, dissolved into static. The room went dark for a heartbeat. In that darkness, the hum of the projector fan sounded like a jet engine preparing for takeoff. Then the light returned. But it was not the crisp, high-definition light of a corporate presentation. It was the shaky, grainy vertical footage taken from a cell phone through a kitchen window. The image was blurry at first, but then it sharpened. It showed a woman on her hands and knees. She was wearing a gray uniform that hung off her skeletal frame. She was scrubbing a marble floor. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. It sounded like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room at once. The guests recognized the floor. They were standing on it right now. And then they recognized the woman. It was Esther. On the screen, the date stamp in the corner showed that this was filmed just 3 days ago. The Esther on the screen looked up. Her face was bruised. Her eyes were terrified. Then a red high heel stepped into the frame. It kicked Esther in the ribs. "Clean it faster," a voice hissed from the speakers. It was a voice everyone in the room knew. It was Patricia. The real Patricia, standing in her red dress near the buffet table, dropped her glass. It shattered on the floor, echoing the violence on the screen. She put her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. She was not horrified by the act. She was horrified that she had been seen. I looked at the crowd. The polite smiles were gone. The champagne flutes were lowered. Men in tuxedos looked at their wives with unease. They were witnessing a crime, and they knew it. Lachlan stood frozen on the stage. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. He looked at the remote in my hand, then back at the screen. "Turn it off," he whispered. His voice was too weak to carry. Turn it off now. I did not turn it off. I pressed the next button. The video cut to black, but the audio continued. It was a recording. The sound quality was crystal clear. It was the sound of a car engine idling and a woman's voice. "We sold the house in Atlanta last week. The money is already in Lachlan's offshore accounts. It saved us Dad." Every head in the room turned toward Gabrielle. She was standing near the front row, clutching her designer purse. Her face drained of all color. She looked like a ghost. "Mom is already halfway gone," the recording continued. Gabrielle's voice was cold, calculating, devoid of humanity. "The drugs we are giving her are degrading her cognitive functions. In a month or two, she will have a tragic accident. Maybe she falls down the stairs. Maybe she leaves the gas on. And then the life insurance pays out." A woman in the back of the room screamed. It was a short, sharp sound of pure disgust. Gabrielle shook her head frantically. "No, that is deep fake. That is AI. He made it up." But the recording did not stop. It shifted again. This time it was a video. A video of a woman sitting on a park bench. It was Margaret Sterling. The guests whispered among themselves. They did not know her. But Lachlan knew her. I saw his knees buckle. He grabbed the podium for support. "My name is Margaret Sterling," the woman on the screen said. Her voice was steady, filled with the righteous anger of a grieving mother. 5 years ago, Lachlan Vance married my daughter Sarah. He isolated her, he drugged her, he claimed she was an addict, and then she died in a mysterious fire. He took the insurance money and disappeared. He is not a businessman. He is a black widow in a suit. The murmurs in the room turned into a roar. The facade of the wealthy, successful family was crumbling brick by brick. The investors who had been shaking Lachlan's hand minutes ago were now backing away, wiping their palms on their trousers as if they had touched something filthy. Lachlan looked around the room. He saw the judgment in their eyes. He saw his empire turning to ash. He looked at me. His eyes were wild. He was no longer the smooth operator. He was a trapped rat. "You did this," he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You ruined everything." I did not shout back. I calmly pressed the button one last time. The screen went black again. Then a live audio feed crackled through the speakers. It was the recording from the microphone hidden in the flower on Esther's dress from just 5 minutes ago. "You look terrible, old woman. Just sign the paper and then you can go back to sleep forever." It was Lachlan's voice. The voice of the loving son-in-law who had just kissed her cheek. Then came Patricia's voice. "If you drool on that dress, I will have you thrown in the basement with the rats." The ballroom erupted. It was total chaos. People were shouting, some were taking out their phones to record, others were heading for the exits, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. I walked over to the microphone stand that Lachlan had set up for his victory speech. I grabbed the mic. I looked at the crowd. I looked at the cameras that were live streaming the event to the internet. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said. My voice was calm, deep, and resonant. It cut through the noise like a knife. The room quieted down, not out of respect, but out of shock. They wanted to hear what the executioner had to say. "You came here to celebrate success," I continued. "You came here to witness a merger. Well, you have witnessed it. You have seen the true cost of Lachlan Vance's ambition. You have seen the blood that paid for this champagne." I pointed at Lachlan, who was cowering near the fireplace. "This man told you I was crazy. He told you I was a criminal. He told you my wife was sick. But the only sickness in this room is standing right there in a tuxedo." Lachlan snapped. The humiliation was too much. The loss of his money, his reputation, his freedom, it all hit him at once. He let out a primal scream. He grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the nearest table. "I will kill you," he roared. He charged at me. He moved fast for a man with a bad leg, fueled by pure adrenaline and hate. The crowd screamed and parted like the Red Sea. He raised the decanter high, aiming for my skull. I did not run. I did not flinch. I had spent 40 years on construction sites. I had faced down bullies, racists, and storms. A desperate man in a tuxedo did not scare me. I waited until he was 2 steps away. I saw the madness in his eyes. I saw the swing coming. I stepped to the left, a simple, efficient movement. I hooked my foot behind his good leg, and I shoved him, hard. Lachlan flew forward. His momentum betrayed him. He crashed face first into the podium. The crystal decanter shattered in his hand, slicing his palm. He hit the floor with a heavy thud, the microphone stand toppling over him with a screech of feedback. He tried to scramble up, blood dripping from his hand, his hair wild. But before he could rise, a heavy boot stepped on his back, pinning him to the marble floor. It was Russo. He had come out from the AV booth, and behind him were 4 men in windbreakers with badges on their belts. "Federal agents, stay down." The doors to the ballroom burst open. Uniformed police officers poured in. They did not come for me. They went straight for Gabrielle and Patricia. Gabrielle tried to run toward the side exit, but a female officer grabbed her arm. Gabrielle kicked and screamed, her designer dress tearing at the seam. I didn't do anything. It was all him. He made me do it. Patricia was not so energetic. She simply collapsed into a chair, weeping into her hands as an officer read her rights. I stood over Lachlan. He was pressed against the floor, his face squashed against the cold stone. He looked up at me. His eyes were wet with tears of pain and rage. "You are nothing." He spat, blood bubbling on his lips. "You are just a nobody." I crouched down. I brought my face close to his, so only he could hear me. "I am a father," I whispered, "and I am a husband, and that is 2 things you will never be again." I stood up and straightened my tie. I looked at Esther. She was still sitting in her wheelchair in the center of the chaos, untouched, like the eye of a hurricane. I walked over to her. I knelt down and took the flower with the microphone off her dress. "It is over, baby," I said softly. Esther looked at me. The confusion in her eyes seemed to clear for a moment. She looked at the police taking Lachlan away in handcuffs. She looked at Gabrielle being dragged out screaming, and then she looked at me. "Franklin," she whispered. "Did we win?" I kissed her hand. "Yes, Esther, we won." I stood up and looked at the crowd one last time. They were silent, staring at me with a mixture of fear and awe. I picked up the remote control and placed it gently on the table next to the unsigned contract. I walked out of the ballroom, pushing my wife's wheelchair. I did not look back at the ruin I had left behind. I had brought the house down just as I promised, and as we rolled out into the cool night air, leaving the sirens and the screams behind us, I felt lighter than I had in years. The architect had finished his work. The foundation of lies was gone. Now it was time to build something real. The ballroom had transformed from a sanctuary of wealth into a theater of justice. The uniformed officers did not move with the polite deference usually reserved for the rich residents of Emerald Hills. They moved with the sharp efficiency of a raid. The doors were blocked. The exits were sealed. The flashing blue lights from the cruisers outside cut through the elegant windows, painting the terrified faces of the guests in strokes of neon panic. Lachlan lay on the marble floor, his nose broken and bleeding, his tuxedo torn at the shoulder. The arrogance that had defined him for years had drained away, leaving only a whimpering coward. 2 officers hauled him to his feet. He could not put weight on his bad leg, and he cried out in pain, but the officers did not care. They slammed him against the wall. I watched as they twisted his arms behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It was a mechanical sound, precise and final. "My lawyer, I want my lawyer," Lachlan screamed, spitting blood on the floor. "You will get your lawyer," the officer said, tightening the cuffs. "You will also get a federal indictment for insurance fraud, attempted murder, and elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you start using it." Across the room, Patricia was putting up a fight. She was clawing at a female officer, screaming about her rights and her status in the community. "Do you know who I am?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "I am Patricia Vance. I am on the board of the museum. You cannot touch me." The officer spun her around and pushed her face against a pillar. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and accessory to kidnapping," the officer stated calmly. "And ma'am, the museum just called. They are removing your name from the donor wall tonight." The guests watched in horrified silence. These were the people who had eaten Lachlan's food and laughed at his jokes just an hour ago. Now they recoiled as the police marched him and his mother through the center of the room. Lachlan looked at his investors, pleading with his eyes for help. But the investors looked at the floor or checked their phones. In their world, failure was contagious, and Lachlan Vance was now a terminal disease. I stood by Esther's wheelchair, my hand resting on her shoulder. I felt her trembling, not from fear, but from the shock of the noise. I leaned down and whispered that she was safe, that the bad people were going away. She watched them go, her eyes wide and childlike. She did not understand the legal charges, but she understood the energy in the room. The predators were being caged. Russo walked up to me. He wiped a smudge of grease from his forehead. "The feds are seizing the computers in the study," he told me quietly, "and they found the stash of unprescribed sedatives in the master bathroom. It is over, Franklin. They are buried." I nodded. It was over for Lachlan and Patricia, but there was one piece of debris left to clear. One structural failure that cut deeper than any other. Gabrielle. She had tried to slip out through the catering entrance during the chaos, but an officer had intercepted her. Now she was being led back into the center of the room. She was not in handcuffs yet. The police were letting her walk, but she was surrounded. She looked around the room, frantically searching for an exit, searching for an ally. Her eyes landed on me. She stopped. The officer nudged her forward, but she planted her feet. She stared at me, and then she stared at her mother in the wheelchair. The realization hit her. Lachlan was gone. Patricia was gone. Her money was gone. The only lifeline she had left, the only people who might possibly save her from prison, were the 2 old parents she had tried to kill. She walked toward us. Her walk was unsteady. Her designer heels clicked on the marble floor, a hollow sound in the sudden quiet of the room. Her mascara ran down her cheeks in black rivulets. She looked like a ruin. "Daddy," she whispered. She collapsed to her knees 5 feet in front of me. It was not a graceful fall. It was the collapse of a building with no foundation. She crawled forward on the expensive floor, dragging her torn silk dress through the shards of the broken crystal decanter. She did not care about the glass cutting her skin. She reached out her hands toward me. "Daddy, please tell them. Tell them I didn't know." I looked down at her. This was the girl I had carried on my shoulders. This was the girl I had taught to drive. And now she was a stranger kneeling in the wreckage of her own greed. "I didn't know he was going to hurt Mom," she sobbed, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "Lachlan made me do it. He controlled me. I was a victim too, Daddy. You know me. You know your little girl. I would never hurt Mom. Please tell the police it was all him." She grabbed the hem of my trousers. Her grip was desperate. She buried her face against my leg, weeping loudly. I was scared, Daddy. He threatened me. He said he would leave me if I didn't sign the papers. I did it for us. I wanted to save the family. I love you. I love Mom. Please don't let them take me to jail. I am your daughter. I am your Gabby. The guests watched uncomfortably. It was a pathetic display. A grown woman reverting to a child trying to use affection as a currency because she was bankrupt of everything else. I felt her tears soaking into the fabric of my new suit. I felt her shaking against my leg. A part of me, the part that was just a father, wanted to reach down and stroke her hair, wanted to believe her, wanted to save her. But then I remembered the video. I remembered her voice in the car. In a month or two, she will have a tragic accident. I remembered the way she had slapped Esther's hand in the laundry room. I remembered her sneer in the parking lot when she told me to go die quietly. That was not fear. That was malice. That was not a victim. That was a co-conspirator who was only sorry because she got caught. I looked at Esther. She was looking down at Gabrielle. There was no recognition in Esther's eyes, just confusion. She pulled her dress away from Gabrielle's grasping hand as if she were touching something dirty. That movement from my wife hardened my heart into concrete. I reached down and took Gabrielle's hands. She looked up, hope flooding her face. She thought I was going to pull her up. She thought I was going to hug her. "Thank you, Daddy," she breathed. "Thank you." I peeled her fingers off my leg, one by one. I did it gently but with an irresistible force. I removed her hands from my person and dropped them back onto the cold floor. I took a step back, putting distance between us. Gabrielle looked at her empty hands, then up at me. The hope vanished, replaced by a dawn of absolute terror. "Daddy," she whispered. "I am not your father," I said. My voice was not loud, but in the silence of the ballroom it sounded like a thunderclap. Gabrielle flinched as if I had struck her. What she gasped. I looked at her with clear, dry eyes. I saw the biology we shared, but I saw no spirit. "My daughter died 6 months ago," I said. "She died the day she signed a paper to sell her parents' home. She died the day she watched a man stick a needle in her mother's arm and did nothing. She died the day she decided that an inheritance was worth more than a life. No, Daddy, don't say that," she wailed, reaching for me again. "Stop," I commanded. The authority in my voice froze her. "You are not a victim, Gabrielle. You are an accomplice. You drove the car. You forged the signatures. You mocked my grief in a parking lot. You are not a child who made a mistake. You are a predator who lost the hunt." I gestured to the police officers who were waiting respectfully a few feet away. "Officers," I said, keeping my eyes on the woman on the floor. "Take her," Gabrielle screamed. It was a raw animal sound. "No, no, Mommy, help me, Daddy, please." The officers moved in. They pulled her up from the floor. She thrashed and kicked, her dignity completely gone. She looked at the crowd begging the wealthy guests to help her, but they turned their backs. She looked at Lachlan being dragged out the other door, but he was too busy crying for himself to look at her. She looked at me one last time as the handcuffs snapped around her wrists. "I hate you!" she screamed. Her face twisted into a mask of ugliness. "I hate you! I hope you die alone!" I watched her struggle. I felt a phantom pain in my chest where my heart used to be, but the organ that pumped blood through my veins now was made of something stronger. I stepped closer to her one last time before they dragged her away. "You won't have to worry about me dying alone," I said softly. "I have Esther, and I have the truth. But you, Gabrielle." I paused, letting the words hang in the air like a guillotine blade. "You are an orphan from today. You have no father. You have no mother. You have no home. You traded us for money, and now you have neither. Goodbye." I turned my back. I heard her screaming my name as they dragged her out of the ballroom. I heard the heavy doors slam shut, cutting off her voice. The silence that followed was heavy but clean. It was the silence after a storm passes. I looked at the room. The party was ruined. The floor was covered in glass and wine. The guests were fleeing. But I saw beauty in the destruction. I saw a foundation that had been rotten finally cleared away. I took the handles of Esther's wheelchair. "Let's go home, Esther," I said. We walked out of the ballroom, leaving the wreckage of the Vance empire behind us. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel joy. I felt the deep exhaustion of a man who has carried a mountain on his back and finally set it down. But as we stepped into the night air, I looked up at the sky. The clouds were breaking, the stars were coming out, my daughter was gone, my son-in-law was gone, but my wife was here, and I was here, and for the first time in months I could breathe. The bridge had collapsed, but I was still standing on the shore, and tomorrow I would start building something new, something that no storm could ever wash away. 6 months have passed since the night the lights went out on the Vance empire. I did not attend the sentencing hearing. I did not need to see Lachlan Vance in shackles to know he was broken. The newspapers reported that he wept when the judge read the verdict. 15 years in a federal penitentiary for fraud, money laundering, and attempted murder. There is no parole in the federal system. I heard through Marcus that Lachlan is not doing well inside. The prison general population does not have much sympathy for men who abuse women and the elderly. His arrogance has been beaten out of him. He spends his days in protective custody alone in a 6x8 cell staring at a concrete wall. The man who needed a mansion to feel important is now the king of nothing. Gabrielle avoided prison time by turning state's evidence against her husband. She testified about the fake accounts, the insurance policies, and the drugs. She sold him out just as easily as she tried to sell us out. But her freedom came with a price. The court seized everything. The house, the cars, the jewelry, even her clothes were auctioned off to pay back the investors Lachlan had swindled. She sent me a letter last week. It had no return address, just a postmark from a rundown neighborhood in New Jersey. She said she is working double shifts as a waitress at a 24-hour diner. She complained that her feet hurt, that the customers are rude, and that she can barely pay rent on her studio apartment. She asked for money. She asked for $500 to fix her car. I burned the letter. I did not burn it with anger. I burned it with the indifference of a man disposing of trash. I know that diner she works at. I imagine her wearing a stained apron, pouring coffee for men who don't look her in the eye, cleaning up their messes, wiping down sticky tables. She is finally learning the lesson I tried to teach her 20 years ago. You have to earn your place in this world. She wanted to live like a queen without doing the work. Now she is serving the subjects she used to look down on. She is living the life she tried to force her mother into. There is a poetic justice in that which no courtroom could ever deliver. Esther and I moved away from the cold winters of the Northeast. We bought a small house in the mountains of North Carolina. It is not a mansion. It has no marble floors. It has no crystal chandeliers. It is built of cedar and stone, sturdy and warm. It has a wrap-around porch where we sit in the evenings and watch the fireflies dancing in the twilight. Esther is healing. The doctors at St. Mary's were miracle workers, but the road to recovery was long. For the first few months, she would wake up screaming in the night, terrified that she was back in that laundry room. She would flinch if I moved too fast. She would apologize if she dropped a spoon. It broke my heart every time, but I stayed patient. I held her hand. I told her the truth over and over until she believed it again. Yesterday, I watched her in the garden. She was kneeling in the dirt planting hydrangeas, the purple ones she loves. She was humming a gospel song. The sun caught the silver in her hair and she looked beautiful. She looked like herself again. She stood up, wiped the dirt from her hands, and waved at me. There was no fear in her eyes, only peace. We used the settlement money from the lawsuit against the insurance company not to buy luxury cars, but to set up a legal defense fund for the elderly. We hired Marcus Vance to run it. Every week we help another senior citizen who is being exploited by their family. We help them rewrite their wills. We help them get restraining orders. We help them keep their dignity. It is the work I was meant to do. I am no longer building bridges of steel and concrete. I am building walls of protection around the vulnerable. Esther walked up to the porch and handed me a glass of lemonade. She sat down in the rocking chair beside me. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence between us was comfortable. It was the silence of two soldiers who have survived the war and found their way home. I reached out and took her hand. Her grip was strong. We are not rich by the standards of Emerald Hills. But as I looked at my wife safe and smiling, I knew we were the wealthiest people on earth. To those of you listening to my story, I want to leave you with one final thought. There is a dangerous misconception among the younger generation. You look at our gray hair, our slow walks, and our trembling hands, and you see weakness. You see an expiration date. You see a resource to be harvested. You are wrong. We are the generation that built the foundations you stand on. We survived wars, depressions, and revolutions. We have buried friends and raised children. Our patience is not submission. Our silence is not ignorance. We endure because we love you. But do not mistake that love for blindness. If you treat your parents with honor, you will inherit a blessing that money cannot buy. But if you treat them as a burden, if you try to steal the life they worked for, remember my story. Remember Franklin Moore. We may be old, but we are not helpless. And if you push us into a corner, you will find that the hands that once held you when you cried are the same hands that can dismantle your entire world. Be good to your family, not because you have to, but because if you don't, justice has a way of finding you. And sometimes justice drives an old Ford truck and carries a pipe wrench. This is Franklin Moore signing off. Take care of your own, or someone else will. What I took from this nightmare is a simple truth. Family is not defined by the DNA we share, but by the respect we show. My daughter chased a mirage of wealth and lost the only real treasure she had. But Esther and I found something better than money. We found our strength. We proved that gray hair is not a symbol of weakness, but a badge of survival. We taught the world that you cannot discard human beings just because they are old. We are the steel in the concrete. We are the roots of the tree. And if you try to cut us down, be prepared for the tree to fall on you. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs courage today. Subscribe to the channel for more stories where the underdog bites back. And tell me in the comments below, have you ever had to make a hard choice to protect the ones you love from your own family? I will be reading every single one. Until next time, stay strong.